Okay, we're going to start, and whoever joins will join. Okay, in halacha we're up to a new halacha called pas akum bishul akum cholav akum, and to give an introduction to this halachic concept, there's certain things that are biblically forbidden, and certain foods are rabbinically forbidden. The reason why the rabbis forbade the foods is because a lot of them are connected to, they might come to cause intermarriage and association with the non-Jewish people that would cause them to intermarry. And for instance, one of the reasons why we said, wine that's not cooked, touched by a non-Jew, you're not allowed to drink, because wine brings people closer together. And if people are going to become too close together, they might assimilate, associate, and they might intermarry. So another thing similar to that, the Chachamim said, was called pas akum, meaning if a guy bakes bread, that is something also we're not allowed to eat. There's bishul akum, when a non-Jew will cook the food, will also, and I'm just saying the general names of it because there's a lot of details when it applies and when it doesn't apply. So pas akum means idol worshiper. Pas akum means bread that was baked by a non-Jew. Bishul akum means the food was cooked by a non-Jew. Okay, now there's certain criteria to that. If the person baked the food from A to Z or cooked the food from A to Z, so then under certain conditions, you're not allowed to eat the food. Now there's something called, we're talking now about bread. Pas includes, by the way, cakes, anything which is mezonos, not anything like Pesach cakes that are made with potato starch, which are not one of the 5 grains. That doesn't apply to dinner pas akum. So if a guy would bake, let's say, a Pesach cake using potato starch, as long as the ingredients are kosher, you would be allowed to eat it. It wouldn't fall under the category of pas akum, the bread that a non-Jew baked. Now, there is another concept called pas palter. Pas palter means bread that a non-Jewish baker baked. Now, the difference between a private individual baking bread or a bakery baking bread is when an individual non-Jew bakes for you, so then there's an association between the two of you. When a bakery bakes bread, they bake 100 loaves of bread, and they're not having anybody in mind. There's no association directly with the baker and the person buying the food. So that is what's called pas palter. Pas palter means bread that was baked by a baker. Now, under certain circumstances, that would be halachically allowed. What circumstance is that? If there's no pas Yisrael means bread baked by a Jew is not available, or it tastes better. But in many cities, otherwise it says you really, ideally, in our circles, we're much stricter about it, that we don't eat pas palter, because we only like to eat pas Yisrael, meaning bread baked by a Jew. Now, what's the definition of bread baked by a Jew? And here is an interesting difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. But I'm going to say firstly the Ashkenazic, the law according to the Ashkenazim. As long as a Jew turns on the fire or does something in the cooking process. For instance, let's say the non-Jew turns on the fire, but a Jew puts the pot on the fire, or he turns on the oven, the non-Jew turns on the oven, and a Jew comes and puts the bread in the oven. That is called pas Yisrael. Or if any Jew has any part of the baking process, they'll stir something out. Well, see, by pas, it's not that possible. By bishul, it would be more. And that is, let's say, if a Jew on cooking, let's say, would stir the soup, that would be fine, even though the non-Jew did everything else. but a Jew had something in the cooking process, so then that would be fine. Okay, but let's again concentrate now on pas palter and pas hakum. So halachically, it says that if there's no pas Yisrael around, then you could be lenient with pas palter, or if it's not as good. But in the religious cities, where you have a lot of bakeries, kosher bakeries, a person really should not rely on pas palter. Now, just for clarification's sake, for instance, when the OU gives a hechsher on cookies or breads, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's pas Yisrael or not. They're lenient. They're telling you the product is kosher. They're not telling you that a Jew turned on the fire or a Jew did something in the cooking process. So there's a lot of very big companies that have an OU, or for that matter, even an OK, that are not necessarily pas Yisrael. You have to find out which ones are pas Yisrael that the Jews turned on the fires. The same thing with the Chavke, all the other kashrus organizations, that if they just because they give a hechsher on it, they're lenient with the concept of pas palter. It's a bakery, it's not directly baked by a guy, and therefore they're lenient because at least people are going to be eating kosher, and there is a leniency to be able to eat pas palter. So therefore, just because people don't know, are unaware of this, by the way, just because something has an OU or an OK does not mean necessarily it's pas Yisrael. Okay, now what happens when in the olden times, when they would heat up the ovens manually, and the Jew even threw in one piece of wood into the fire, that would also make it that the Jew actually turned on the fire. Now this din, by the way, of pas akum applies. We said before that the reason for that is because you might come to intermarry. So halacha discusses what happens if the king, the non-Jewish king, bakes bread. There's no way he's going to let his daughter marry you. So there's seemingly no reason to be afraid of assimilation. Nevertheless, halacha says you still can't. You're a non-Jewish bread, you're not allowed to eat it. If it's a bakery, it's a different story. There are leniencies about a bakery. Now, the question in halacha is asked, what happens if somebody who's not shomer Shabbos bakes a bread for you? The ingredients are all kosher. Does the din of pas akum apply to somebody who's not shomer Shabbos? Now, we've learned in the past that according to technical halacha, somebody who is mechalol Shabbos b'faresia, somebody who openly, publicly desecrates Shabbos, publicly, and they do it despite, they have a din like a non-Jew. If they shech, the shechit is not kosher. If they touch your wine, they might have idol worshipping thoughts in mind. It's not good. Today we're lenient because today we learned it's the classification, what's called tinek shenishba. It's not a mechalol Shabbos. Mechalol Shabbos means one who knows all about the laws of Shabbos, knows everything about Shabbos, knows the sanctity of Shabbos, went through the system of really knowing about Shabbos, and then turns away from it. That person has a din like a non-Jewish person. Even then, when it comes to cooking or baking, many poskim, many opinions are lenient. Why? The whole reason you're not allowed to bake is because you might come to intermarry with them. You're allowed to marry a daughter of a not shomer Shabbos person. If she's religious, you can marry them. So the whole reason doesn't apply. The whole reason is you shouldn't intermarry, but you can marry the daughter of a mechalol Shabbos. She's still Jewish. You can marry her. So the reason of why they forbade cooking or baking of a guy doesn't apply. Other opinions say no. They have a din like a guy, they're a guy, and that's it. You can't be makel. I'll tell you where this applies in a very practical level. So let me just get back to one very important point. There's another issue, though, that we mentioned just now, that today they don't have a din of mechalol Shabbos. They don't have a din, they're tinik shenish, but they're kids captured literally amongst the goyim. They were raised as goyim. They never had a proper Jewish education. They don't know anything. They don't have a din of a person that's a great Shabbos. So then, when they would bake, halachically, definitely would be fine. Now, I'll give you where this is a very practical example. You have a lot of Bali Chuvas. People became, from again. And they're living by their parents, and they go visit the parents for a week. The parents have a kosher home. The kids make sure the ingredients are all kosher. But the mother is cooking. The mother turns on the fire. The mother is cooking. No problem with the ingredients. But the bottom line is, she's not Shemesh Shabbos. So would this religious son be allowed to eat that food that his mother made? And the answer is, in those cases, the answer is yes. Because number one, the mother really doesn't have a din of a real Mechalo Shabbos. Because more, they just never learned. Secondly, even if she would, there would be opinions that hold you're allowed to. But every person would have to ask their Rav what the halacha would be in these individual cases. But the bottom line is that children that go home to parents that are not religious, and the parents have a kosher kitchen, everything that they check the ingredients and everything else, then it's not a problem. The kids could eat at home. Okay, next. Now, great, like we mentioned, we're talking not about cooking. Today we're going to focus on baking and maybe start cooking. Again, the din of pas akum, this bread that was baked by a non-Jew, only applies, we learned, if it's from one of the 5 grains. If they baked a cake, a bread from wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt, those are the 5 halachic grains that if you make a cake out of it, it would be mazonas. If you would make a bread out of it, it would be a motzi. But if it's not one of the 5 grains, like somebody makes, we mentioned just before, somebody makes a Pesach cake from potato starch. Potato starch is not one of the 5 grains. You make a bracha on it. If it's soy flour, you make a shahakol on such a cake. Because the only time you make a mezenas or hamotzi on cakes, if it's made with flour from one of the 5 grains. Again, wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt. If it's not made from those, then it's a shahakol. So there's no din of pas akum on it. It's not bishul akum because it's not considered a prominent thing that will be fit for a table of a king and so on and so forth. Okay, now what happens if something? Okay, I'm gonna leave this. Let's go now into the cooking law. Okay, this is until now we were discussing baking. Bakery baking is much more lenient than a private person baking. It has to be from one of the 5 grains, and so on and so forth. What is the technical difference between bread and cake? Bread is when it's baked with flour and water. Cake is when the majority of the liquid is not water. In other words, in order for bread to be hamotzi, there's a few criteria. Number one, it has to be one of the 5 grains. Next, it has to be kneaded with water, and it has to be baked. Those are the 3 criteria for something to be hamotzi. For something to be mezenas, again, it has to be one of the grains, flour from one of the 5 grains. It has to be that the majority of the liquid is not water, which means it could be oil, it could be eggs, it could be juice, not from concentrate, but let's say regular juice. If the majority of the liquid of the batter is not water, then it's mezenas. If it's majority water, then it becomes a mitzvah. That's the difference in halacha. So the difference, number one, would be if you have to wash and bench on it, or is the bracha mezenas and alamechia. But as far as these dinim are concerned, that we're learning now, there's no difference. Now you have the next category, and within the same thing is called bishul akum. Bishul is called cooking. Now, in order for something to be considered cooked by a goy, by a non-Jew, has to be something, there's two definitions for it. Number one, it has to be fit. In halacha, it says the expression, it fit, it's fit for a king's table. And secondly, it has to be something which cannot be eaten raw. For instance, if somebody takes an apple, if a non-Jew takes an apple and makes a baked apple out of it, the law of bishul akum doesn't apply. Why doesn't it apply? Because you can eat an apple raw. Anything that you can eat raw is not bishul akum. Anything that's not fit for the table of a king is not bishul akum. Now, what is that definition in modern day terms? So halacha classifies as in today's halacha terms, fit for the table of a king means you would serve it at a banquet, at a formal dinner. You would serve it at a banquet, a wedding, a bar mitzvah. That is called Eilal Shulchan Malachim. What you serve by somebody's house is not necessarily considered Eilal Shulchan Malachim if you wouldn't serve it at the banquet. For instance, to give you a few examples that we'll discuss in more detail, rice is served at banquets. Potatoes today are served at banquets, even though there's an argument that halacha potatoes are fit for a table of a king. But today the fact is, you go to a bar mitzvah, you go to an exclusive wedding, the side dish is baked potatoes. So potatoes today are eilal shulchan malachim, they are fit for the king. So then that din would apply. And potatoes you can't eat raw. But if somebody is going to cook a vegetable, or somebody is going to cook something that could be eaten raw, there's no din of bishul akum on it. So if a guy bakes an apple, there's no bishul akum. If a guy is going to cook any food that you can eat raw, but if a guy, let's say, cooks meat or fish or things like that, those are eilal shulchan malachim. So that would be a big problem unless if a Jew did something in the cooking process. That means the Jew either turned on the fire, put the pot onto the fire, or stirred the food, and realistic things like that. Then it would be fine because they did something within the cooking process. Okay. I'm just looking. Oh, so to give you an example, here's a very interesting question. That there's different opinions about it, but halachically you can technically be lenient. Now, we just mentioned potatoes are fit for a table of a king. So now the question is, what about potato chips? Are potato chips fit for a banquet? So there's two ways of looking at it. Potato chips are potatoes. So potatoes are fit for a king's table. For the other side, if you're looking at the finished product of potato chips are not served at a banquet. So when it comes to something like potatoes, for sure the law of bishul akum applies. So if a non-Jew is going to turn on the fire and do A to Z and make you a baked potato, it would be very questionable if you can eat it. Halachically, you wouldn't be allowed to eat it. If a guy cooked meat, chicken, fish, things like that, from A to Z, you wouldn't be allowed to eat it halachically. But what happens when you have something like potatoes that is fit for a king, table of a king, but potato chips aren't? So do you look at the finished products of potato chips, or do you say, no, it's a potato, and a potato would be a problem? What would be this difference in practical halacha? All the OU potato chips are not bishul yisrael. Like we said before, the OU says it's kosher. They're not telling you that a Jew turned on the fire. So there are opinions that say, no, you're allowed to eat it. Many opinions say you're allowed to eat it. Why? Because potato chips is what's the process. That's what they're frying. Frying, it doesn't apply b'shalaka because the potato chips are not fit for a table of a king. Other people say, no, you should be strict. Why? Because potatoes are fit for a table of a king. So again, halachically, there's many opinions that say you're allowed to eat it. Certain people, machmer, that's their business, so to speak, if they want to be strict in it or not. But halachically, a person could be makel with potato chips. The same thing. There's another interesting question in Bishul Akum. What about if something is steamed? A lot of foods today that are canned, it's interesting, are steamed. They're not cooked. They're put in a can and then go through a steaming process, which makes the finished products. So like baked beans and things like that. So it's basically steamed. So now the question is that also called cooking? And there's a darker tshuva that most people rely on. And the darker tshuva says, we don't make up new things on ourselves. The Chachamim said, cooking is forbidden, roasting is forbidden, frying is forbidden, but if somebody steams something, it's not the normal way of cooking. So he holds, and that's most people today are lenient with that things that are steamed, not cooked or baked or fried, then they wouldn't have a problem with bishalakum. You'd be allowed to eat it. I mean, if it has a good hechsher, you'd be allowed to eat it because steaming, the rule of bishalakum doesn't apply on steaming. Now, I'll give you another example of potato chips that would be even more lenient. There's something called Pringles. Okay, everybody knows what Pringles are. Pringles are potato chips, but they're not really potato chips halachically. Regular potato chips that you buy are basically potatoes that are sliced very thin, and then they're fried. That's why what bracha would you make when you eat potato chips? The bracha would be very pure adama. Very pure adama, because it's a piece of potato. What bracha do you make on Pringles? On Pringles, the bracha is not adama. On Pringles, the bracha is shahako. Why? Because Pringles, if you notice, that's why they're exactly all in the same shape. Pringles are not sliced potatoes. Pringles is made, and I saw a video how it's made. They dehydrate the potatoes. It's like potato starch. They make it actually into a potato flour, and then they fry it that way. So it's not even potato anymore, because it's dehydrated. Fruits and vegetables lose the prominence of the original food, so therefore it wouldn't be hadama. It's not even a potato. You make a shahakal on it. So Pringles, for sure, is a less problem of bishalakum because it's not even a potato. The whole problem with potato chips is because it's a potato. And potatoes are fit on the table of a king. But the problem is Pringles are not potatoes. Halachically, dehydrated potatoes are, or you have, you can make what they call powdered mashed potatoes, that you take it and you mix water in it, and then it becomes mashed potatoes. That is also not really potatoes. And then you would make a shahako, because it's dehydrated potatoes made into a flour, like we said before about potato starch. Potato starch, you make a shahako on the cakes because it's not grain. It's not even hadama because there's no pieces, it's dehydrated. So in those cases, halachically, it would be a much different story than anything else. Another interesting strictness that the Sfardim have, which is really halachically a very big problem for them, the Sfardim hold that turning on a fire is not enough. Ashkenazim, the Ramah, another lot of the Ashkenazic poskim hold that if a Jew turns on the fire, it's enough. Then the guy could do the rest of the cooking. Sfardim hold it's not enough for the Jew to turn on the fire. The Jew has to put the pot on the fire or in the oven. Then it's not bishul akum. So for them, really, there's a very big issue by them if they would go to restaurants, because unless if you have a Sephardic Hechsher restaurant, none of the restaurant, the leniency that all the restaurants are using is the Jew, the mashgiach turns on the fire, but all the putting the pots on, these big pots, the mashgiach doesn't put them on. The non-Jews, the workers put it on. So according to Sfadim, it might be bishul akum. According to Ashkenazic, it's not bishul akum. But those are things that people just have to be aware of, and bishul akum. Now you have another interesting shaila about cereal and milk. Oh, by the way, let me just go back to a second. Sometimes you buy in a supermarket par-baked bread. I think what's called a bakery, the big Croatian company, I don't know. They have, it's like par-baked bread. That means it's not edible as is. You can't eat that bread. It's half baked. It's not baked yet completely. So what do you have to do? The instructions are you have to bake it in the oven for whatever, 20 minutes, whatever it may be. So then that's not a problem of bishul akum. Why isn't it a problem of pasakum and bishul akum? Because it's not edible as is. You're doing something in the cooking process or the baking process. So that's fine because you're part of the baking. And if a Jew is part of the baking, then halachically we learned it's allowed. But what happens if it's edible as is? Then you really don't have to heat it. Or it's technically edible as is, and they're just suggesting to heat it because it'll be warmer. But it's edible as is. That could be a problem with bishul akum or pasakum. So in other words, if you have pie crusts, okay, that you're going to put, make a pie out of it or whatever, but you have a finished ready to eat pie crust. So there are pie crusts that you have to bake yet. It's not really 100%, they tell you still to bake it. Then that's no problem. But if somebody has a pie crust that's edible as is, ready to eat, and you're just going to put in the vegetables or the pie fillings or whatever, there is an issue with that because that pie filling is already, the pie is ready to eat. And that mezainis is already, again, with cooking it more is not going to change it. Cooking it more will not, or baking it more is not going to change it because it's already became pas akum that you're not allowed to do. Okay, we're going to stop here for now and go to Tanya. I want to remind everybody, Mitzvah Shem, next week, the classes are starting at 8:30. You have no choice to me from 8:30 to 9:30 because days are later.